Testing, testing. Folks who are sitting in back, we county staff are trying to move the seats up here so everyone has room to sit down. So there used to not be room down here, and now there is. So please feel free to sit down instead of blocking the doorway. I know some of you guys just think it's cool to stand back there, John. But at least some of you should come down here and sit at the seats. There's seats over here too. There's a couple ones there. Wondering what was going to come out in these maps, and I think they are a tool. I hope that you will view them as a tool and not as gospel. And I think there's some technical reasons to do that Mr. Fry can go into. But it also is part of the process of allowing people to rebuild. And so that is a very important juncture that we are at. This is mainly a product of standardized FEMA methodology. There are some assumptions that went into the model that Mr. Fry will go over. And we look forward to your questions, of which I'm sure there are many. And we do have FEMA staff on the phone, correct, with us tonight as well. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Supervisor. So with the arrival of the FEMA flood mapping information, you know, it's something we've all been waiting for. It's something that that we've all kind of been on pause for, so we could better understand what's changed in our community, what topography has changed, and those of you that are anxious to rebuild and get that final little bit of information, tonight is our opportunity to take a look at the information and provide you with some resources that are one-on-one so that we can answer the questions on a parcel-by-parcel basis. So the FEMA flood recovery maps, they serve to guide the rebuilding and long-term recovery. As the native vegetation above our communities reestablishes itself, we're still at risk, and we're going to be that way for the next few years until the vegetation takes hold. So tools such as these maps and other maps will help us redesign our structures and hopefully build a little more resiliency into our community. It's important to know a few things tonight. That this is a flood map. This is not a debris flow map. And there's a big distinction between the two. And I think later on, Mr. Fry is going to talk a little bit about that as well. This recovery mapping provides advisory flood elevations. And it is not going to be used solely for evacuations. Evacuations are going to be based upon all of our mapping tools and other information as we put together the plans for next fall and next winter storms. As everyone here knows, the 1/9 disaster changed the ground conditions, creating a need to remap the existing hazard conditions. Mapping the hazards is vital for disaster recovery and all of our rebuilding efforts, provides the data necessary for designing and permitting to reduce our risks. Next Tuesday, the Board of Supervisors is going to consider adopting the FEMA's recovery mapping. I'm not going to hear that. There it is. Oh, good deal. So next Tuesday, in front of our Board of Supervisors, they are going to adopt and consider the FEMA maps, which is, as we talked about, a critical part of the design. The purpose tonight is to get an anticipation, and everyone means with. So our plans here have members that are one consultation partners. Director Black tonight is going to talk about ways to contact. Some of you maybe not received. Are on the tonight. They're all in cooperation with Montecito Association, July 11th. That'll be another opportunity to get more additional questions that you may have. I'd like to introduce Fry, manager with Flood District, who's going to walk through the map. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome, everybody. To be here tonight. And we're about the map. The biggest question is we're getting right off the gate, like, how do I map? So I thought 10 minutes just the difference and convince that it's and understand what the map is. So this is a portion of map that zoom of an area with is a typical mapping. I'll start with the review. There's some other line, and the yellow lines mean it's the lines of the dated in a 100-year flood event that is utilizing scenario of. Is this help with that, please? I know I'm good clicking buttons out there, somebody comes up and helps. The yellow lines represent inundation. This is a flood. And I think I also want to compliment FEMA team because they did a hurricane together. The reason for this map is the previous flood maps used to guide development flood heads. They're called. It was rendered not used generally. The whole landscape and information on that really helped. And FEMA has already agreed to review those insurance rate maps across 4 or 5 years. They've already started that, okay? But we don't want in this community, guys, and you can rebuild in these hazard areas. And this is a high hazard area. And we'll always emphasize, as already been mentioned today, that this is a flood map, it's a water map, it's not a debris flow map, okay? It's not an evacuation map. It's not going to be used for insurance. So that's another question that we're getting a lot of is, how does this affect my insurance? And it's not. They're going to continue to use the flood insurance rate maps for that. So anyway, my hat's off to FEMA for the effort that they put in for this. So if we can, okay, there we go. This is a much better view. Thank you. Thank you. So again, I'll just repeat. I'll point over here. Well, I'll point over here so if everybody can see. And if you can't see, let me know. Okay, and I'll do it again. Okay, so I'm in your way. Okay, let me just talk from the side here, if I could. That's probably the best thing to do. Thank you. Help me here. Okay, so yellow to yellow. Areas of inundation, okay? A 100-year rainfall event with a runoff that's from a burned watershed. And it's also taking into consideration the landscape that was left behind after December 9th. That's another pretty amazing thing about this mapping is that the state and the federal resources were able to put together a topographic map. Okay, so okay. Does that help? Does that help? Okay, okay. Perfect. This is Hansel, by the way, and he's a mapping guy. So I think we're in good hands here. So right here, yellow to yellow, all right? Or over here, yellow to yellow. Those represent areas that are going to get wet in a 100-year rainfall event, as I described. Burned watershed, landscape from January 9th, which includes all the deposition. There were channels that were filled in. What this map also includes is an assumption that the bridges and culverts are plugged. Okay, so that's, I think, an important point to describe. The FEMA flood insurance rate maps, as a rule, generally only contemplate like a clear water flow, okay? Water that doesn't really carry debris or rock, woody vegetation. But I'd like to ask anybody here to describe a flood event that we've had that doesn't bring down debris. We'll call them debris-laden floods. They're not debris flows, but channels fill in, culverts plug, bridges plug. That's common. And so we think that this model represents a much truer picture of the threat and the risk. That's one of the assumptions that went into the map. It is a model. It's not perfect. And even the best of modeling experts can disagree on the results of a model. That's just the inherent nature of hydrologic and hydraulic modeling. So But this was done by FEMA and their mapping experts. This is what they do. So, yellow lines, inundated areas. So within those yellow lines, maybe we can pull up, okay, yeah, this is good. This is good. So within those yellow lines, you're going to see blue shading. And the blue shading is in gradations, different light blue, medium blue, dark blue. And there's a legend that describes the lightest blue is from 6 inches to 12 inches. The next shade is, I think, 12 inches to 36, and then on. It's actually right here. It's kind of small to see, but it gets deep. The deeper the blue, the deeper the water. And I'll say, generally speaking, if you notice the deepest blue, that's following the creek, all right? So that's generally what the map is showing. So that's the depth of the floodwaters at any given particular location. So you'll also notice that within the yellow to yellow inundated areas, there's areas that aren't shaded at all. And those represent areas that are a depth of 6 inches or less. So 0 to 6 inches, unshaded areas. We're going to be applying, if the board adopts this map, these hazard areas. FEMA defines yellow to yellow as a hazard area. So we'll be using this, if the board adopts this, in place basically of the flood insurance rate map that was rendered not usable. And so we will apply the county floodplain management ordinance to this map. I will say that that ordinance, that's been on the books for decades and decades. The requirement in that ordinance is that the lowest finished floor elevation of the newly constructed structure needs to be built such that it is at least 2 feet above what these are being called as advisory flood elevations. Okay. Can we add the pink?
Sure. The water surface?
The contours, yeah. And I'm sure everybody that's looked at this thing, when you first pull it up, it's like it's all pink. It's like a solid color. But when you zoom in, you know, it's not solid anymore. And what you can see is this series of lines. Each line has a number tagged to it. All right. The numbers happen to be in 2 foot increments. Those numbers represent, and the pink lines represent lines of equal water surface elevation. It's the equivalent, I would say, if you've ever seen a topographic map of say a ground survey. Say a surveyor goes out and shoots the elevations and they create this nice looking map. It's got these contour lines. Those contour lines represent points of equal elevation above a certain elevation datum. Well, this is the same here. It's just, this is a water map, not a land map. And so these contours are, again, they're representing points of equal water surface elevation. So, like if I just point right here, okay, that looks to be like an 80. So what that's telling me is that where I pointed, the water surface elevation is elevation 80. Let me also add to everybody here, before I forget, I consider this map, which is publicly available and posted, to be a graphical representation of the results of the FEMA mapping, of the modeling. Okay, it's graphical. That's the way I categorize. You have to, look at, for a water surface contour, you have to discern the shade of blue to know what the depth is. Our staff has been provided with reams of digital data, okay? So that, for example, when someone comes in with their one-on-one meeting with their P&D case manager, flood control is a part of those meetings, and they have access at their hand to that digital information, and they'll be able to zoom in at the point of interest and determine what an advisory flood elevation is to the 10th of a foot. And that's the level of detail that we will be going to. We won't be using this to determine the advisory flood elevation, although graphically it'll tell you kind of what ballpark you're in. So, I mean, that's really what this map shows. Yellow to yellow, inundated limits, no shading within that, 6 inches and less. If it's blue, it's the depth as indicated on the legend. Flood control has the digital information through the modern mapping tools that we all use now. I also want to say another question that we get is like, okay, so how do I know what like my ground elevation is? Or how do I know what my ground elevation like was before January 9th? Ground elevation after January 9th is captured in this mapping, and part of the data that we've been provided by FEMA allows us to go into those data layers, if that's what you call them, and we can with a fairly precise level of accuracy determine what those ground elevations are. Now keep in mind that's representing a January I believe the flight was January 16th. It was, a week or 10 days after the debris flow event. So we have that data. And my vision here is that when you get into the one-on-one, then our folks will be able to drill down and give you all of that data, okay? I find it useful when I look at it, and I think you all will too. Now, as far as your ground surfaces before, we really don't have that information readily available, but there are data sources available. Like, for example, unrelated to the debris flow, we've had posted on our flood control website for like years aerial topographic mapping. It was done like 25 years ago. It's not to a level of detail like this is. That's a place to start. I was speaking with someone weeks ago, and they pointed out, well, if you've ever had a building case go through in the past 5 years, who knows? Maybe you had to have a land survey at that time. Maybe you could, or maybe the previous property owner did. Maybe you could go down to, I don't know if the building records contain that information or not. But anyway, you have to kind of research and look at what's out there to get the debris flow topographic information. We don't really have that information readily available. So again, this is the map. It's not an evacuation map. It's not a debris flow map. It's not a flood insurance map. But it is going to guide our recovery in terms of determining minimum finished floor elevations if you're located within what the map is identified as a hazard area. I don't think I said that term, but yellow to yellow is a hazard area. So that's the map.
Okay, so before we turn it over to a whole lot of questions, which a lot of us have, I'm going to turn it over real quick to Diane Black, our planning director, and we're going to put a slide up here that talks about our case managers a little bit. So Diane.
Great. Well, I think if you've been to any of these meetings before, you've probably heard this before, but we have the Planning and Development Department has set up a system of case managers to meet with property owners who've been affected by the debris flow and the flood. And we are really encouraging people to come in and meet with their case managers. And up on this screen, you'll see a phone number to call, an email address, and then you can also come into the zoning counter to schedule meetings. And we are scheduling meetings with the case planner that's assigned to your site, as well as a flood control staff person, so that you can get good information and good direction about next steps in the building process. So I encourage people, if you haven't already met with your case managers or don't have an appointment scheduled, to do that. And I know some of you have already engaged experts, bring your experts with you, your architect, surveyor, engineer, if you have them. If you don't, it's fine. Come and talk to us, and we'll try and help you as best we can through the process. That's what we're here for. And the people sitting next to me at the table, Jeff Wilson is our Deputy Director of Development Review, and he's really kind of heading up our effort with planning and development. And then two of our case managers, Ray Montana and Tess Harris. And we have quite a few others as well, so that you might see these people and you may see other people, but we're all here wanting to help people and give you good information and help you through the process.
Thank you, Diane. So I'm sure a lot of us have the same questions. So in an effort to try and make sure that we're able to hear the audio for the folks watching at home, if you could make your way to a couple of the microphone in the back, or if you're close by, raise your hand and I'll hand you mine. But let's see if we can get some questions here answered. And we've got some folks here and folks on the phone line that are ready to answer some questions. So with that, let's start it out in the back of the room.
Hi, my name is Marshall Miller. I am a property owner in what is now the yellow zone. What is the appropriate process for appealing an inaccuracy in the map? In my particular case, our pool happened to be empty on the day of the flyover, so there's a little dark blue spot where there would be 10 feet of water potential, and we kind of want it to be flooded with 10 feet of water because it's our swimming pool. Right. So
that makes a lot of sense, actually.
But my concern is that to have a dark blue dot in our backyard has property value implications that are disconnected from. So to generalize the question, what is the appropriate process for looking for kind of map revisions or edits to an issue? My issue, but issues like that.
So thank you for the question. That's a good one that I'm sure a lot of us in the room have. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who's going to speak loudly and clearly so we can all hear him, and let us know what that process is.
This is Eric Simmons, and I had a little difficulty hearing the question. Was it in regards to the letter map change process?
So Eric, the question really was based on if we have a situation where there's an inaccuracy in the map itself, or something that's noted, on the property, and maybe it came out kind of odd on the map. What's the process by which they contact? Who do they contact with that information in question, and talk about changes?
Okay. Yeah, I've provided my contact information and continue to do that, and work closely with Santa Barbara County and John Fry in that the mapping that was distributed and made available on Monday is what we have and are confident in. But if there's immediate questions or concerns, we're looking into those, and I believe the county has stated that in the future, they're working with property owners and others as conditions could change, to refine that. But, in the short term, let's say now, and as you mentioned, I'll be down in Santa Barbara on July 11th. We'll be happy to take those comments and evaluate those.
Okay, Eric, thank you. Maybe I should have been a little more specific on this particular case, because this case, there's a blue dot where there was a swimming pool in the backyard. And certainly as it comes up on the map, it's trying to depict something else because of the depression and the low-lying dug-out swimming pool. And popped up on this map because of the elevation of the swimming pool itself. But that's the scenario on this one, and we'll go ahead and get your contact information here up on the screen. So Eric, could you hear that last part of the scenario?
Yes, regarding the swimming pool.
Right.
You know, again, I'll continue to coordinate with primarily John Fry, but others at Santa Barbara County, and if we need to make an update to the recovery map, we'll do that.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I'm going to turn it over to John Fry, who wants to add some additional information to this one.
Yeah, and I don't think Eric was able to really hear the premise of your question. That's actually an easy question to answer. It really is. We'll be able to deal with that locally very, very quickly. I mean, a swimming pool in the backyard, it is going to show 10 feet of water or whatever, which is what you want. We'll be able to handle those very, very quickly. So that's the way I see it anyway.
And I think he was also concerned about, you know, future for value and different things if that affected.
I appreciate the flexibility and the understanding by local planning and development. I'm very grateful for that, so I want to express sincere gratitude. But it's still an issue to have a map where there's a dark blue dot in the backyard in terms of overall insurance questions and whatnot. How do we, aside from relying on the reasonableness of planning and development overall, which I would count on, how do we actually revise the map itself for something like that seems like a data error?
Well, I mean, if I were working one-on-one with you, I would probably suggest, well, let's just start off by offering to talk to your insurance company. We can put a letter on flood control letterhead. I'd like to think that something as straightforward as that could work, because if they are such that they need, and if we're talking down the line here, if other of these situations come up, say 2 years from now, to go back to FEMA for swimming pool, that's just a burden on everybody. I'd like to think, I could be wrong, that insurance company would take our statement that, hey, this is a swimming pool. This blue represents a swimming pool, not a flood threat. That's how I would approach it, and then take it from there.
And so, John, you'd be able to amend the map based on the knowledge that that's a swimming pool?
Well, I would perhaps, under the authority of the local flood control district, make a statement. In fact, the FEMA map change process here, and maybe Eric Simmons can help me out here a little bit, but the typical flood insurance rate map, not only in Santa Barbara County here, but across the country, FEMA has set up a process for identifying map changes or map errors. They call that letters of map amendments, or there's any other number of mechanisms. That's for the flood insurance rate maps. Those are regulatory maps. This recovery mapping, keep in mind that this isn't going to be used for insurance purposes. That's probably the first thing I should have said instead of talking about sending a letter to the insurance company. But it's not an insurance rate map, number one. And then if that doesn't satisfy them, let us try that letter of authority thing with the flood control district. I'm willing to give that a shot.
This is Wendy with Congressman Carvajal's office. I just wanted to be clear and say what John has said. This is not a FEMA rate insurance map. That is the whole process. This map is very clear for FEMA applications. And so John is people's department like that hello.
But absolutely, my problem. Probably in the room. The plenty of it is so free. It's entitled for questions of things. What I am flood inundation, or as a citizen, not that I don't trust my government and love my government, but I get nervous for where a data set can kind of wander, if you will.
Thank you for that. No, flood control is using it to guide reconstruction in the hazard area, as identified on this map. Now, we don't have control if somebody else gets their hands on this and uses it for nefarious purposes. I mean, we would support against that. But we're using it to identify high hazard areas, and we'll continue to emphasize these are high hazard areas, and that's why we've got this map.
So let me add one more thing to that, and that is that as these unique situations, I'm glad we started with the pool, because That sounds a little more fun than some of the other things. But as these kind of issues come to us, we're going to be taking note of them, and we're going to supply a whole list of these to FEMA because, you know, they did their best they could. I know that we and our team did the best we could to try and tweak things to make things right on the ground. But we didn't catch everything, I'm sure. And so I think what Eric was saying on the phone was that, hey, he's happy to listen to and hear the different scenarios. We're going to try and bundle those together as much as possible, send them over to FEMA, and work with them to see if we can adjust the map moving forward. Okay. Next question.
Hi. My name's Karen Feeney, and I guess I have a couple questions. I'll ask them one at a time. And one just got added because of this conversation. I had heard over the last couple of months that these maps would be used to generate 4 to 5 years down the road, the new firm maps, the insurance maps. Is that not the case?
So let me turn to our FEMA representative on the phone for that. Eric, did you hear that question okay?
Unfortunately, I did not. I heard a flood insurance rate map, but that's about it.
Do you want to repeat it for him? Or?
No, why don't you take this microphone? This one might work a little bit better.
Okay. So, over the last few months, as we've been waiting for these base flood elevation maps to come out, it was my understanding that they would be used by FEMA to generate new firm, I don't have the exact terminology of that name, but flood insurance maps for basing flood insurance rates and all that. So I'm just wanting to understand if that is the case or not. Did you hear me?
The new recovery map will not be used to revise the flood insurance rate map. There is a separate process to update and revise flood insurance rate maps for entire watersheds, and that has not yet begun. FEMA will be coordinating with Santa Barbara County and the cities. A first step in that is called discovery, where we have discussions and talk about the scope of the needs, not just what flood insurance rate map panels should be updated based on changes in conditions, but also rebuilding and building safer on possible mitigation opportunities, that is, ways future losses can be reduced. And that's a separate process. So no, the flood insurance rate map update has not begun.
So, question number 2.
Please,
use that?
go ahead.
Want to use that?
Oh, yeah, I think it might help.
Okay.
Let's just hang out back here.
So, what is the relationship of the 2012 maps to anything that we need to determine the change in the base flood elevation? Is there any relationship with that map? Or are we really looking at topography maps from surveys or what you have from 25 years ago?
Well, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it because I should have brought this up before. One thing that we have to do when you come in one-on-one with your case manager is, you know, for any given property, we're going to be looking at the recovery mapping, but we also have to look at the flood insurance rate maps. And if it turns out that those reflect a higher base flood elevation than what the recovery mapping does, then that's the elevation that controls, okay? So that's how I see we will continue to be using those 2012 flood insurance rate maps.
If there's a difference, I'm sorry, could you just repeat that again? I didn't
Okay, sure. Yeah, no. So we have the flood insurance rate maps. They happen to have a date of 2012.